Hey everybody, I'm here today with Mike Wilkerson, and we're going to have a fascinating discussion on something that he coined called biogeology. And as everything what we do here with the Great Wake Up, the idea is to expand our consciousness, to think about ways in which what we thought may have been true, especially the mainstream narrative, can be questioned. And so that's why I'm very interested in the following subject. And with that, I'll let Mike take it away. And he's also going to share his screen and walk us through so many of the ideas and the research that he's done. So with that, Mike, I'll turn it over to you.
Welcome. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.
Nice to be here. Yes, so I guess I'll just jump in. I started looking about 10 years ago into alternative takes on just about everything, which led me eventually to geology. And I'm not a geologist, so people can take everything I say today with a grain of salt because I don't have any formal training in the matter. I work as a chiropractor in Spain, and I've been here for the last 13 years. Before that, I was in tech. I worked with IBM. And as a teen, I was a hobbyist and got in trouble for hacking. And that's a whole other story. But I've always been interested in questioning the unquestionables, you could say, and digging into things that people often think are taboo and that you shouldn't even bother to question them because so much is settled science. And I have a problem with that term because that's not how the scientific method works. It's never settled. And if you're not allowed to question things, then you're dealing with dogma and doctrine. And so I was turned on to some ideas a long time ago by a friend that I thought were ridiculous. And the more I dug into them, the more I found it was very hard for me to debunk the kinds of things that he was bringing to the table. And this had to do with alternative takes on history, alternative takes on cosmology. And as I dug into that, I started to really question a lot of what we've been given as far as the mainstream narratives. And that eventually led me to geology and started questioning are the stones that I see around me, are they really formed the way we're told? And the more I dug into that, the more surprised I became. And as a chiropractor who studied a lot of anatomy and histology, which is the study of tissue, I was always taken by the fact that a lot of the stone that we see looks biological in nature. It doesn't look like something that formed through the classic petrogenesis tale that we're told. And like I said, I'm not a geologist, but I can give the basics on that, about what we're told is the origin of stone. That's what petrogenesis means. Petro being stone and genesis meaning creation. And there's basically what they call the cycle of petrogenesis, which is igneous stone, which is coming from volcanoes. So you can see this happening. It comes out of the volcano as lava and it flows down the mountain, and then it cools and it hardens, and you can see lava flows. And then we have sedimentary stone, which is basically dead creatures and dead plant life that have layered down, and under immense pressure under the seafloor or just on land, that pressure causes those layers to eventually morph into what they call metamorphic rock. So that would be our harder stones like granite and marble and those kinds of things. And when we think of marble, we think of marbling also. And you get these kind of swirling types of forms that also look a lot like histology, look a lot like the tissue of creatures. So I, like I said, I was interested in alternative cosmologies. I'm not coming at things from a creationist perspective, though I do believe that we live in a created realm. I'm not a Christian, but I find it interesting that a lot of the ancient texts and mythologies talk about these things as fact, not as just fairy tale or airy fairy stories. And so that was not something that I was really even aware of until I had already started doing research into the topics that we'll be talking about today. And people started coming to me with different passages from the Bible, and then I found out about things like apocryphal texts, which are books that were removed from the original Bible. like the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jasher and the Book of Giants, where they talk openly about the fact that, or the idea that giants once existed in this realm, and that titans also existed. And when I say titan, I'm talking about creatures that were the size of mountains. And the Book of Enoch even gives um, a dimension for that. They're called ells, and the Titans were said to have reached the height of 3,000 ells, which in our modern measurements would be a mile tall.
Wow.
So this is something that mainstream science and history and geology tell us is absolutely impossible for a variety of reasons. One, that, well, they don't exist. We don't see them anywhere. We don't see the remains of them. And two, the gravitational pull would be so great that they would collapse under their own weight. So there's a variety of reasons that I don't ascribe to that way of looking at things, and we can get into that a little bit later. But so yeah, Titans, and then also different mythologies surrounding things turning to stone, instant petrification, stuff like Medusa, for example, the Greek goddess that with the snake hair that could turn things to stone just by looking at them. So this may be a metaphor for something that actually happens periodically in our environment that has to do perhaps with plasma, and the idea that whether it's electricity or plasma or different phenomenon that can lead to a far more rapid petrification. Because we know that petrification is a real thing. We can see petrified trees, but we're given stories about 200 million year long processes that lead to that petrification. And I now believe that happens far more quickly, and that the evidence for that is all around us, but we're blinded to it because we're taught that such things are impossible.
Yeah, well, I'm really excited to hear what you have to say on this topic and to see those slides. Before I watched your video, this was never on my radar. I, of course, am aware of giants. I didn't really understand the how big we're talking about when it came to titans. It didn't occur to me that that's how large titans are. But I have a quick question before you get into showing the material that you've researched. Assuming that there is, I'm also a big proponent, by the way, of questioning the mainstream narrative and the way that we are, they say the science is settled, right? It seems to be the antithesis of what science is. So I'm all for interesting new ideas. But I have a question for you. Based on all your research here, if there are some people that do know the things that you're talking about to be true, or there were in the past, what would be the reason for keeping the public away from that information? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, if there was an intentional attempt to hide this from
Yes.
people, why would they do that? What would they benefit? What would the benefit be? Well, on a simple basis, like when it comes to, I also dig a lot into the giant trees. I've done a lot of presentations on, like, for people who aren't aware of this, I'm not talking about the sequoias, which are the biggest trees in the world. I'm talking about trees that would have made the sequoias look like saplings or moss, even that big.
Yeah.
And so the what we think of as geology, mining is incredibly important in this world, mining for resources. So if people knew that there were once gigantic creatures and gigantic trees, and that those were where we're getting our precious minerals and our gemstones and things from, and not from these processes that we're told, like with the diamond, that it's a million years and a million pounds of pressure on coal that creates a diamond. If it's coming from biological processes and they know that, and everyone else doesn't know that, then they're going to have a definite advantage on where to look for things and what is of value and what isn't. So that's one aspect of it. Another aspect is that we're given these timelines about how old the Earth is. We're told it's roughly 4.6 billion years old, and that the cosmos is 16 point something years old. And if those timelines are not true, well, another way to look at it is that the geological timeline supports the heliocentric and the Big Bang cosmological timeline that is kind of the mainstream accepted belief.
Right. And so this
So
would
the
throw into question so much of their cosmology, the traditional history that we were told about our place in the universe and really the age of the universe. And so this would throw into question so many different things. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah, yeah. If any one of those cornerstones is taken away, then it's a house of cards that falls.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of what Graham Hancock has been doing for many years in terms of questioning things like Göbekli and whether or not our understanding of the Great Pyramids, their age and things like that is accurate or not. So all of that is very interesting to me. And with that, I'd love for you to feel free. I made you host if you want to share your slides and talk to us about
Sure.
what you found. This love to learn more.
Yeah, so screen two and then share sound as well and optimize for video sharing. I'll be doing some of that. And you should be seeing my second screen, which should be blank there, right?
There's some
Or
very
there's a,
practical type colors.
yeah, colorful background. Okay. And
Yep.
yeah, so this is, I'll just be picking some slides from what's really a much longer presentation. I gave this presentation at a conference in California earlier this year, and it's touching on all these things that we talked about. And this is just a little bit of my background. If people want to read that later, they can do that. So I think this is really where science should go to, cross-disciplinary practices. There's way too much compartmentalization in science right now in academia, and everyone becomes a little expert in their own field.
Hmm.
And what do they say? Becoming an expert is knowing more and more about less and less until you know absolutely everything about nothing. And so I think that we should really try and avoid that by collaborating especially across fields that don't necessarily seem to be related, but could be.
Hmm.
So I coined the term biogeology. It's a term that already existed, and you can see the definition there at the bottom, this interaction between the Earth's biosphere and the lithosphere. But it's a very little used term in the scientific terminology. And so I appropriated it because if there's any truth to the stuff that I've been doing research into with regards to big trees and titans and also this idea of rapid petrification, then there needs to be a term to distinguish between the mainstream geological narratives and these alternative narratives. Ultimately, it wouldn't be needed. It would all be geology if we if we were discussing things accurately.
Hmm.
So this is what I was referring to before, the different things that you're not allowed to question. I find it interesting because I think it's wonderful as an intellectual exercise. We shouldn't be afraid of these different topics. And when people say, "Oh, that's already been decided," well, science is never really decided, like we said.
Right.
And so I started looking into all kinds of things with alternative history. You mentioned pyramids a moment ago. There are tens of thousands of pyramids that are found all over the world, and many of them are buried, and they're in places that they shouldn't be. And I remember from my history classes in college that there was no connection between, say, the Mayans and the Incas and the Egyptians. But it seems odd because they're using the same building technology, even though the pyramids take different forms. We see this repetition of pattern, and the same goes for the star forts, which a friend of mine has mapped over how many? He's mapped over 10,000 of these things. Just going to set this up so you can see a pointer.
We,
So these are what are known as star forts here, and these are small ones. Literally all of the old world cities are built on these things, and they're known as star citadels. And then there's a lot of people talking about the idea of Tartary, which is this ancient civilization for which there's loads of evidence, but we're not taught about it in our history books at all. And there are maps that suggest that it was larger than the Holy Roman Empire. And
for
along
those,
the way,
sorry, for
mhm,
those that don't know, could you describe just quickly what the mud flood idea is, briefly?
yeah, it's the idea that there were that all over the world in most of the cities, and you see even in North America, there's evidence of great flooding. A lot of buildings are buried. They have facades that are below ground, so there's no reason you would dig a foundation for a building and go down and then build a facade with windows and doors and then cover that with earth. So the idea is that the buildings were originally, they looked different. They were much deeper or taller, and then a flood came along that devastated everything. And whether that was realm wide or whether it was regional and whether it's happened in cycles, it's a very big topic. But
Yes.
um, along the way, I came across this subject, which is the idea that these plateau type structures that are found all over the world are actually uh, the remains of giant trees.
Wow. And you said there's no, I saw a thing that there are no forests in the world. What do you mean by that? Or, yeah.
That the original forests were devastated in some fashion. Some kind of a cataclysm took these things out,
Okay.
and we are blinded to the obvious, which is in front of our eyes, that this stuff actually looks like tree, and in this case, you can even see growth rings.
Yeah.
So, this would have been a small tree. This is a place called Jugartha, I believe. I don't recall which country it's in. Um, and then, we're given these images in Hollywood of the great trees. Let's see if I can advance this. There we go.
Okay.
Avatar. This was the. Oh, it's not letting me advance. It's because I'm on the pointer.
Right. Like the idea of Pandora, I think, was from Avatar, and this we see this again depicted in.
Yeah, and then you see this gigantic tree that falls, and my take on this now is that we're being given, whether it's intentional or it's just part of the collective consciousness, we're being given the truth in the form of fiction, in the
Mhm.
form of fairy tale or stories, and this is really, some see this as a truth drop, that they're giving us the truth in plain sight, but we're blinded to it. We're all paradigm blind is a term that I coined to
Mhm.
to describe, what happens when people, this happens with experts in a field. They
Right.
can't see the the forest for the trees, literally, because they've they've got too much vested in a particular outcome. So this isn't such a strange idea. The ancients all had this kind of cosmic egg world tree sort of an idea, and this is the Norse mythology. Yggdrasil was the name of the giant tree, and there was this mountain at the center of the earth. Um, there's lots of different things that you can dig into when it comes to the cosmology, but that's those are massive topics that take a great deal of time. But the fact is that structures like this exist.
And
And we're told that this is the result of cooling lava. This
yes.
is Devil's Tower in Wyoming.
So,
And go ahead.
well, I just have a question. So, because we're talking originally about Titans, is it possible, or if I'm understanding this correctly, would it be that the Titans lived amongst these giant trees, or are these two
Yeah.
separate ideas?
Yeah. And in the Book of Enoch, the story is that the angels were sent to bring the trees down prior to the great flood, because God decided to flood the earth because everything was impure, because they were mixing species, and things were not going according to plan.
Mhm.
And so that was why Noah's flood was sent, was to wipe out all of the impure life in the world. And the angels did that, and the Nephilim come into the story. These are I'm not well versed in these stories. They're just things that I've come across along the way. But this is what lava looks like, right? It's amorphous. It's never in straight lines. And we're told that the Devil's Tower and all of the basalt columns around the world were formed as the lava cooled rapidly. You mentioned Graham Hancock and the and talk about this mini ice age that happened at the end of the Younger Dryas period, which was 12,500 years ago.
Mhm.
And they say that that's how this was formed, is that well, no, the basalt columns and Devil's Tower are said to have formed 50 million years ago. Let me go back to that slide real quick just to explain what was there. So they're saying that the Earth was originally up here. Oh wait, you can't see my pointer. There we go. The Earth was originally up here,
Okay.
and this was a volcano, and the volcanic lava came upward, and then it cooled very, very rapidly, which causes this pressure that that creates these honeycomb patterns. And then eventually, over 50 million years, all of that Earth that was around it has all disappeared. So that's the mainstream narrative, and there are different takes on it, but they all kind of are saying basically the same thing. And and I just question if that really makes any sense when you look at something like this.
Yeah. Well, these are amazing pictures, by the way.
So you've got the hexagonal stuff, and then you've got even a larger hexagonal. So to me, this looks far more like a biological structure, something that grew. Now, a lot of people talk about a silica era where there were these giant trees and plant life, but that it was made out of what we think of as stone. But I don't believe that's what happened. I believe that originally these were fibers of great structures that were living, and then something happened that led to their petrification. And we can get into what that something is in a little bit. But this is what I was talking about before. We've got these ancient myths of the Titans in the Greek mythology. We have Paul Bunyan in the North. We have in North America. And there are a lot of people who are looking at these kinds of structures, and they're saying, "Oh, this is clearly some petrified creature that was afoot." And I'm of the mind that it could be, but probably not. And I think a lot of this is what's known as pareidolia, which is when we see patterns that aren't really there. And that's what critics of my work would say that I'm guilty of, is that I'm suffering from pareidolia, or I'm suffering from another term, which is apophenia, which is when you've recognized a pattern that doesn't really exist.
Okay.
So when I started to dig into this topic, I was very interested in it from the scientific method perspective. Make observations, think of interesting questions, and then formulate a hypothesis. Then you've got to develop predictions, and you've got to go out and gather data to see if there's any truth to your predictions. And you're constantly refining that hypothesis, and it's you're in a loop here as you develop general theories about things. So these are the problems that exist when you get into this subject. There's a whole lot of people out there that think that they learn a little bit, they think they're experts in something, and then they start pushing it as fact. And that's what's known as the Dunning-Kruger effect. And you start to learn about something, and suddenly you think you're an expert, and then a little while later you find out you didn't know a whole lot about anything. So there's a lot of problems with the quote unquote research that's being done. People are looking at things from just one angle. They're not paying attention to the fact that maybe shadows are incorporated into what they're seeing as a face or a body. And there's a whole lot of point and claim. They're just pointing at things and claiming that they are things. And you need way more information. You need way more data before you can even start to claim something. And so, as I've said many times, outrageous claims require outrageous evidence. So I'm going to present some of that if I have enough time. So this is another problem now. There's loads of AI. This is not a real structure. This is easy for computers to fake nowadays. This is an original photo, and this is what someone did to it. So a lot of that stuff is going around on Facebook pages and different ways, and people are sharing it as if it's real.
Yes.
And so pareidolia, apophenia, I've already mentioned. Cherry picking is when you just pick certain bits of data that match your narrative, whatever it is. There's a lot of claims that there's just no evidence for anything. And from the critics side, they're like, oh, there's no evidence to support this, that, or the other thing, when in reality, there may be a lot of evidence, but that evidence contradicts mainstream narratives. And so people don't take it into consideration. And then these other things I'll just pass on. But this is the Dunning-Kruger effect. I know everything, and then all of a sudden you get to the point where you're like, whoa, it's really complicated. And this is where the experts are. And so yeah, and then getting in gravity is a massive subject that is one of the main debunks. They reference the square cube law, which is that as something grows in size, its volume increases dramatically. And so then if you have gravity and gravitational pull, that's why they're saying that these creatures or these trees couldn't possibly have gotten this big because they would have collapsed under their own weight. This is what I described before, the petrogenesis cycle going from sedimentary to metamorphic. And then that is under such pressure that it melts and then it becomes magma. And that's what they say is at the center of the earth, the molten iron core of the earth. And then that eventually gets pushed up and becomes igneous stone. And this is a nicer visualization of that process.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that also happens, but like I said before, they're justifying their billions of years of timelines. You know, they talk about, oh, we found these fossils in this layer, and so we know that this layer is 359 million years old. But then when they're asked, how do you know how old this layer is, they'll talk about because of the fossils that are in the layer. So that's known as circular reasoning. This is what sedimentary layering looks like. And very often it's banded where you have one color and then it goes back to another and then it goes back. And it's this alternating back and forth. So I'm of the mind now that this is far more likely tree grain, and I'll show you a lot of examples of why. And just skip ahead here. So even in the mainstream narrative, they've talked about 5 mass extinctions and also gigantism. And megaflora and megafauna are part of the mainstream narrative as well. They talk about a time when dragonflies reached up to 1 meter in size, and we have the dinosaur narrative, which they were wiped out, we're told, by an asteroid strike 65 million years ago. And but if we look at the rock layers, which are being used to tell us how old the Earth is, we're told that something like this would take tens of thousands or maybe even millions of years to form. But what we're looking at here is a slurry flow that occurred when Mount St. Helens erupted. And this whole structure here was formed in a matter of hours as the pyroclastic flow excuse me, moved away from the mountain.
If we could go back to
As the grains were being propelled over the surface in a slurry, the particles separated coarse and fine into thin layers. I had thought that a catastrophe would mix up all the particles and make a homogenized deposit. Boy, was I wrong. Right here, a pyroclastic flow moving at freeway speed or higher can separate particles into coarse and fine. So layering doesn't require millions of years, thousands of years, or even hundreds of years. It can form rapidly in this slurry flow process. So Mount St. Helens tells us something really interesting about how rapidly strata can form. There's even micro.
So, yeah, you had a question there, Michael?
Yeah, going back to dinosaurs for just a moment, I was actually eventually going to ask you if you had a certain cosmology, or I don't know, maybe your sense of what the history of this planet looks like. But just because we're bringing up dinosaurs, what are your thoughts? How do they fit in with everything that you've been researching?
Well, if you get into paleontology and dinosaurs, there's a whole lot of different hoaxes that have been perpetrated throughout the years when it comes to academia. There's a famous one called the Piltdown hoax. There's lots of different species that have been basically created by putting different bones together. And so I'm of the mind now that I don't believe that dinosaurs, as we're told, really existed. I think there's probably a lot more evidence if you look at the mythology and the history and the religious texts. We have dragons all throughout. We have giant serpents. We have giant creatures. I think that the dinosaur things, Jurassic Park and all of that, I think that's more like a Hollywood fiction, and it's part of this justification of these immense timelines. So going back to this idea of petrogenesis and the layering, I would ask the listeners to, if they're looking at these photographs, to say how would something like this form, or those basalt columns form based on the narrative that we're told about petrogenesis. This sort of thing as well. This is a concretion, and they form in concentric rings. They're spherical objects, and these can become very big, many feet across. This is a very interesting structure because you've got this rock here with all these layers, and you can see the layers continue across to here, and then you also have this cell-like structure. So I just immediately am puzzled when I listen to the mainstream narrative, and I see structures like this about how that could form. But if that was biology, if that was part of a large creature or a large form of plant life, that makes a lot more sense. So petrification, like I said, is an undisputed fact. We have lots of examples of it. These are pine cones that petrified in Argentina. The trees went down, and volcanic ash was laid on top of them. So there are a lot of things that can cause petrification. We'll get to that in a second. Petrified trees is the most commonly known. We're told these take hundreds of millions of years, but scientists in a laboratory have created petrified wood in the space of 2 days that is indistinguishable from what you would call normal petrified wood, even when looking at it under a microscope. So there are a variety of ways that it can be done. There were scientists that dropped different bits of wood into volcanic waters that were very hot and high mineral content waters. And within 7 years, they had a fully petrified wood. And they would take it out each year, and it took 7 years for them to petrify. But scientists now have actually been able to create this in a laboratory in a matter of, like I said, 2 days. I won't go into how that's done because we don't have the time for it, but people can read, pause and look up those studies. So my approach to all of this was looking at aerial footage, looking at the anatomy, on-site investigation, a lot of it in particular in this area that I'm in, looking at things with microscopy, CAT scans, endoscopy. This is a more thorough approach to analyzing this subject. But a lot of people are just looking at pictures. There's no on-site footage. So just looking briefly at trees and how they break down and how they swirl and what the knots of the trees look like. There's an infinite variety of the way that grain can manifest and the way that it can break down. And if you look at those little bits there that the hand was pointing at, what you're looking at is just a tiny, tiny part of a larger tree. And that last picture was just to give an idea of how, the swirl and the varying colors. And so this will eventually break down and become forest, right? The forest floor. Well, take a look at these. Here you can see that when the oxidized portion is removed, the grain is still there. So this is identical to what the guy was holding in that photograph. So one of the things that I've come to understand is that sap from trees, when petrified, will petrify to varying kinds of quartz. So we're told petrified sap is amber, which is on a hardness scale, it's a 2.5. Diamond is a 10, the hardest, and then sapphire would be a 9. But sap is amber is a 2.5, so you can dent the amber with a fingernail. But So I wouldn't describe that as petrified. I would describe that as maybe oxidized or just hardened. But you can see with those photographs that I just played, and I'll play them again. Um, this is this is an area in the Black Hills of South Dakota. I have a whole bunch of videos on my channel that are if people scroll down about 10 videos, there's a bunch of 2-minute clips that I recorded in July when I was there visiting a man named Mike, he also has a YouTube channel called Hangman 1128. And he's been presenting information on this subject for many years now. And he is showing, in my mind, unequivocally that this is all the remains of trees that were so gigantic that one of those little pieces that we saw before is anywhere from 50 to 100 feet wide.
Wow.
And you can see that that this looks in every way, shape, and form like tree.
Mm-hmm.
And that's from the micro to the macro. And it's just astonishing to see. And I have HD footage on the channel that people can go and look with their own eyes. In my mind, this is self-evident, and the proof is there for you to see. And the only reason we don't see it is we've all been taught that it's not possible.
Right, that's that paradigm blindness. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, that was the term that I coined to describe it.
I never thought I would have found two, but that thing is fairly wide. I mean, I don't even have words for it. But if you follow along here, you can see, you say, well, that's rock. But if you look on top, there's the bark, and you follow it along, folks, we're at 10 feet right here. Now there's another type of wood that's been remixed with this. There's the rest of the log that we originally started looking at. And look at this. That thing has got to come back here. It has got to be 25 or 30 feet.
And it's
that,
one of...
I am assuming, from the way that this other wood looks, is a log. That is a log. There's another one, and another. Look at the stumps. It's just amazing.
So this is tiny by comparison, but it's just showing that, you know, the mainstream narrative is that the petrified trees, like the biggest one ever found, I think is 8 feet in diameter. There are a lot of things that I discovered after I started to get into this subject that I knew nothing about. Like, for example, opals come from wood. The one on the right is petrified wood, and it's been polished, and you can see all of the detail of the grain. And copper as well. So there's a channel called The Archivist that's a friend of mine. He's done amazing research where he's been looking at the newspapers from the 1880s to the 1920s, roughly, before the Rockefellers took over the educational system. And he's shown with loads and loads of articles that they were mining petrified forests around North America, and they were mining them for silver and gold. Now, trees don't grow gold and silver. I think that what happened is that as they were petrified, there was a transmutation of elements. But here, they're getting petrified logs on a farm 3 to 5 feet in diameter, which assayed $15,000 silver to the ton. This is a century ago. So that would have been a tremendous amount of money by today's standards. And so I think that, when we're talking about petrified sap, where are they finding the gold? They're finding it in quartz veins, quartz seams. They're finding silver there, they're finding gold there and copper there. And so they're looking, this gets back to what we were talking about before with the mining and going into these structures to extract the precious, metals and gems, that is something that the mining companies have been doing for a very long time. And if you know if what I've been looking into is accurate, then they're actually mining these great trees.
Wow.
So I've come to the conclusion that anything can petrify. These are petrified brains, and one of my theories is that anything that starts out fatty, like brain, disc, nerve, what else? All of the fat that's around muscle and in muscle, surrounding organs, all of that is going to petrify to different kinds of quartz. Also, the body itself makes stones. So this is a gallbladder, and these are gallstones. And when you take a cross section of these stones, this is a kidney stone. And one of these is probably gallbladder, and the other is kidney. They look identical to geodes.
Yeah.
So my take is that anything, organs, cysts, tumors, all of this can petrify. And bezoars are a fascinating thing. These, like in cows and horses, they can have, like we have kidney stones, they can have stones that grow to the size of baseballs. And if you do a cross section of them, they have concentric rings that look identical to geodes. And what would happen if something like a coconut were to petrify, or other kinds of fruit? You would get all kinds of different colors, and you would get all kinds of different manifestations. This is from a channel called Thunderbolts Project. Mungo Jup, he did a video called Instant Fossilization, showing that even things like jellyfish can petrify in great detail. And we're told that soft tissue can't petrify because it would take far too long for it to petrify, and it would be eaten by the bacteria and the larvae long before it would ever have a chance to petrify. And here you can see a fish that's petrified in the process of eating another fish. This is just showing that stone can form in a very brief amount of time. Let's see. There we go.
Caves that they say are millions of years old. This right here took 6 months to form. Here's the question. Here's a dinosaur vertebrae. If these right here can form in that length of time, anywhere between weeks to months to years, how long does it take to fossilize a dinosaur bone? If the creationists are right, then it's 4,500 years, no older. What do you think? I'm about to show you 5 different examples of rock forming quickly. Then I'm going to ask you a question about a dinosaur bone. I'm going to show at the end. From Karlovy Vary in the Czech Republic,
these are pipes.
Mineralized water went through these pipes and formed this in 80 years. Here's a spark plug in stone, no more than 20 to 40 years to form this. This little guy right here was put into a mineral springs in Karlovy Vary, and within just 6 weeks, it turned to stone. And this...
Yeah, so this is obviously not hundreds of millions of years old.
Yeah.
It's petrified. I don't know if that's drivetrain or transmission or what, but clearly something that was manufactured. And so I just posed this question. This is the cross section of different kinds of kidney stones, and this is agate and geode. So it's identical in every way. And if we had these gigantic trees, what if they also had seeds and fruit and whatnot? And that may be an explanation for some of these things that we see, these concretions. There are other theories about how these are formed. I'm not asserting anything, but I just think they're fascinating. And another one of these kind of anomalous structures that doesn't make a whole lot of sense when you hear the mainstream tales of petrogenesis and how things are formed. And I just posed the question, what if you had a tree of great size that had, like this does, all these berries on the outside of the trunk that fell down, and then those berries petrified? You might end up with a structure similar to the concretions. And so this gets into, why do things petrify? Paramineralization is the mainstream story. So when we talk about the trees petrifying hundreds of millions of years, what they're talking about is a tree surrounded by mud and salt water that the elements that are in the surrounding material are going to work their way into the tree while the gas and the liquid that's inside of the tree works its way out. And that replacement of materials is what's known as permineralization. And we're told that it takes incredibly long times for that to occur. But as I'll show in a moment, you've got other examples of petrification, lightning, volcanic ash, high mineral content waters. Things can be transmuted biologically as well. And today they're making artificial diamonds and rubies, which are distinguishable with somebody looking, with the right kind of optics. They can determine whether something was natural or artificial, but the hardness is the same. And so just an example of that is this is a place called Lake Natron, which has very high mineral content waters. It's very caustic waters that are the opposite of acidic. And when things fall in, they die. And artist has fished them out and placed them in different ways to make these photographs. The only thing that can survive there are flamingos, apparently, and they don't go for a swim. Did you have a question, Michael?
No, I'm
okay.
In awe. That's amazing.
So plasma petrification, I think, is a very real possibility, even plausibility. This is just using electricity to burn these figures into wood, and that is, if you imagine something like the Ring of Fire going off, like the whole, we're talking worldwide cataclysm, right? Not it's a small local phenomenon for things so massive to have petrified. What would it look like if you had thousands of volcanoes all spewing ash up into the air? Because the ash is, the electricity in the plasma goes through the ash beautifully. And in fact, there's a guy, I can't remember the name of the channel. I had it in my notes, but it's not here. This is a guy, he's got a channel with something like 2 million followers that he does different scientific experiments. And here he's taken 2 different kinds of powder, and he gives the chemical names of the powder, so you can do this yourself if you get your hands on them. And he has a crucible with a ceramic lid, so this can vibrate which permits the plasma to move around. I think he even includes a little bit of steel wool in there. And he puts it into a microwave, and within 10 seconds, he's able to change these 2 powders, which are mixed together, into raw rubies. Now, these aren't, rubies of a quality that you could sell on the market, but the fact that ruby is the second hardest on the hardness scale after diamond. And he's able to create this in a microwave, because the microwave has what's known as a magnetron, which is very powerful. He's able to create that in a matter of seconds. So this gets back to the volcanic question of, this is plasma. If it can create rubies in seconds in a microwave, what would happen if the whole Earth was going off at the same time? And there's something known as Lichtenberg figures, and they look just like the burning structure that we saw in the wood a moment ago. That's known as a Lichtenberg figure. And these are found all over the Earth, and you can see them with Google Earth. And we're told that this sort of structure is carved by rivers. And I've got some examples. Let's see, wait a minute. I've got them on my web browser here. Hold on. Let's see. Yeah, here. This is a Lichtenberg figure. Mm-hmm. So that's formed by that's an electrical phenomenon. Whoops, wrong one. This is also Lichtenberg figure. So what if that was to happen on a scale that was 1,000 or 10,000 times taller or greater? That might make something like the Grand Canyon, which is what we're looking at here from the air. So these are theories. Obviously, I'm not stating it as fact. It's just something to keep in mind as a possibility. And then we have all the supernatural petrification. This is from the different mythologies. The Lakota Indians talk about the thunderbolts, thunderbirds. The Hopi describe the blue star Kachina, which is this thing that comes periodically and causes things to turn to stone. We have the Bible talking about Sodom and Gomorrah and the glittering sword of God. And then you have these different ancient technologies, which are discussed a lot in the Tartarian circles by people, because there's so many examples of artwork and sculpture and photographs of these things that are they're associated with power, like the fasces is on the money in many countries, and some hypothesize that that was actually a form of technology that could even be used to perhaps petrify. And then a lot of people are referring to like the plasma apocalypse or some phoenix event where basically the earth as we know it is altered forever. So I talked about petrified wood being created in labs. They can grow opal as well, rubies in a microwave. Coalification, coal can be created using wood. Just all you need is a little bit of salt water and pressure and heat, and you can create coal. Lots of examples of different things that have petrified. Many people have sent me examples of photographs of petrified hearts. A man, he cremated his dog on a pyre that burned for 36 hours with the hottest burning wood that you can find. And when he was done, all that was left was ash, and the heart remained intact on above the ash. So the heart is very resilient. We'll talk about that in a second. So yeah, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that petrification can happen very quickly. This is a scientist in Italy in the 1800s, Girolamo Sagato, and also Paolo Guerini. They had the secret to petrifying flesh. They could petrify anything, and I'll show you examples in a moment. So also plasma, we talked about that. And so this is Girolamo Sagato, and these are examples of his work which can still be found in museums today in Italy. So his secret of how he did this died with him. And there's another man named Paolo Guerini who also petrified brains and hearts, which ties into some of my discoveries. This is a place called Mother Shipton's Cave in England, and you can see the water is dripping down. People go and they hang objects here, and just like that lake I showed, the high mineral content waters surround, encase, and then eventually harden these objects. I've found loads of what I believe are petrified organs. I'll show examples of those in a moment. And I didn't know about this until last year, but these are known as bog bodies. It's a very strange phenomenon where the bodies fall into peat bogs, which are found in the UK, and I'm not sure where else in the world. They're highly acidic, and it has a very unusual effect on the body. It causes all of the bones and the muscles to dissolve, but the skin remains intact, and all of the organs inside the body harden. So my thought is this could be an explanation for what I believe are many petrified organs that are being found around the world, is that the organs are hardening. Eventually this outer shell erodes, and then maybe there's a permineralization process where the hardened organ eventually is, the remainder of the materials are replaced in it, and it turns to stone. These are just some visual examples of the opal. It's clearly coming from wood. The opal mines, if you look at them with new eyes, when they're going into the mines, everything around where they're finding the opal also looks like wood, and on a much larger scale than this. This is a small example of opalization. But it's anything but a settled science because there's an infinite variety of outcomes, right? You've got all of the different kinds of materials, the different kinds of plants, the different kinds of animals. You have the different conditions in which they're petrified, whether it's mineral, whether it's electrical, plasma, volcanic ash. All of these can yield different outcomes. And then you've got the fungus aspect of it and different things that are, things are in the process of bacterial decay as they're being petrified. So there's a lot of, like I said, an infinite variety of outcome. We talked about these things also. Like geologists are typically not anatomists, so why would they recognize some of the things that I'm going to show in a moment? Would you like to chime in with any questions here?
Well, the thing is, what I'm wondering is maybe we could do a two-part because I need to conclude this meeting and move to another one because there's so much more I want to talk to you about. But before we do that, could maybe stop sharing. Just want to ask you a quick question, and maybe we can cover this in part two. But I have two questions. One, what do you if we're imagining there was these gigantic forests and then perhaps titans as well. What is your theory of what happened to them? That's my first question. And then my second question is, it seems like you may have a different history of this planet. What would that history, if you had to give the broad strokes, what might it look like?
People ask me often, like, how old is this place? And I have no idea. I know that a lot of the dating techniques are hotly disputed and were even as they were being introduced, and things like carbon dating are very inaccurate as you get above thousands of years. And if you get into millions and millions of years, it's highly inaccurate. People have brought young objects in for testing and gotten very, very large numbers. So it's not when they talk about it as settled science, there's a lot to suggest that it's not. And so I don't even get into the whole dating aspect of it because I can't even begin to say. I believe that we live in a created realm. What it looks like, I don't know. I'm not attached to a particular shape. I'm suspicious of the one that we're told, that we're on a spinning ball going through space. And that's something that a lot of people think is the dumbest thing you could possibly believe. And I would suggest to anyone who believes that to read the book of one of your recent guests, Mark Gober, who you had on recently.
Yeah.
He's written a book called An End to Upside Down Cosmology. And it's, he's very astute and has gone through the science with a fine-tooth comb. I would recommend another book by a personal friend of mine named Steve Young. It's called A Fool's Wisdom. And he has a PhD in quantum physics and has come out saying, basically the entire foundation of his ology, if you is pseudoscience. Like what we think of as quantum physics has no real basis in fact, according to him, and he studied it at the PhD level. Happy to put you in touch with him if you like to interview him. Yeah. So, but I'm not attached to a particular shape. I don't know. You can't. The people who claim to be getting outside and looking at the Earth are there's a lot of fakery in what's been done by NASA, going back to the original moon landings or supposed moon landings, right up to the present day. There's all kinds of examples of fakery and Hollywood tricks and harnesses being used to simulate zero G and vomit comets where the plane goes up and they do a parabolic curve in order to have a moment of weightlessness. There's all kinds of tricks that are being used and have been proven, but the question is why? Why are they doing that? There shouldn't be a need to do that if they're really doing the things they're doing, or they claim to be doing.
One question more before we conclude today. What do you think could have happened to these titans if they did exist, including the trees?
Well, without a doubt, there was a cataclysm because they're not here walking around, and the trees are there. I didn't really get into, the best evidence for the trees. I showed, a few photographs, but people can go to the live stream tab on my channel and they can see my recap of my trip to the Black Hills, where I met with this other guy who gave me a tour. He's been studying those sites for years, so it was awesome because he took me to all the best sites, and it's without a doubt tree, and it doesn't match the mainstream narrative at all. And you have to be blind not to see it, or paradigm blind. And we've all been taught that such things are not possible. But once you realize that it is, then you have to take a step back and go, okay, well, what is this place? How big is it really? What is it? What does it look like? How old is it? What happened? I think that, to answer your question, some kind of a major plasma event is my best guess because plasma is so quick to petrify things, and volcanic activity will do it as well. A pyroclastic flow from a volcano can reach temperatures of 1400 degrees Celsius and can move at the speed of sound. And anyone who's ever sat in a really hot sauna and blown on their arm, you can practically almost burn yourself with the wind, right? So normally when you blow, it cools things down, but when you're in really hot conditions, it heats things up. And so you add 1400 degrees to a whole lot of speed. Yeah. What could that do to a body or to a tree or something? So it seems like some were cut down because there's a whole lot of plateaus that have these artesian wells with just never-ending waterfalls coming out of the top, and you can't explain that with rainfall. So that water is coming from the deep, and it's still pumping to this day. So I think that fits perfectly with the theory.
Well, I have two final requests. One, can you tell everybody where they can follow your work? And number two, can I invite you to come back on this show, and I want to talk to you about so many more things.
Sure, we can do a part two because we didn't even get into my research at all. I mean, this is I'm just laying out the foundation. I don't know how to do this in 30 minutes or 40 minutes. Sorry, it's too much data. But yeah, I've got some very, very profound, compelling evidence, concrete, empirical evidence to show that's repeatable, scalable, predictable, and very, very, very specific. And it doesn't match mainstream geological narratives at all. So we can talk more about that. To find me, the channel name is right there. It's Stellium7. That's all I have. I don't know. I have some backup channels on Odyssey and on BitChute, and but I'm not really active there. YouTube is where I do my streams from on these subjects.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to say thank you, Mike. You blew my mind. These are such interesting ideas, stuff I never thought about before, which I'm sure people have said to you before. So just want to say thank you, and we're going to definitely have you back to talk more about these things. I really appreciate it.
We really did just scratch the surface. So this is just kind of laying a foundation. So I'm happy to come back. We can do it sooner or later. I don't know, whatever you prefer.
Absolutely. Thank you.